So this session is anchored in incorporating lived experiences into federal research practices. And I will let our panel introduce themselves. Again, this is an important part of this work. We know that many of you are already in communities very heavily in engagement practices and policies, and we want to let them dive into their slides. And so we mind you that we do have, we are doing this both live and online, right? And so we want to acknowledge that. Thank you to all of our persons that are logging in.
Maybe. We have audio. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Okay, now if I minimize this, and I can see my, okay. 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 Hello, everyone here and everyone online. Very excited to see you all, very excited to be here. My name is Marla McDaniel, and I will introduce my co-panelists shortly, but I'm from the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C., and we are going to be talking today about a project that involves incorporating lived experience in federal research practices. Let's see if I can. So we're going to be talking about lessons from a community advisory board. Okay, so to start off, so many federal agencies more recently have been exploring options to meaningfully engage people with lived experience in federal research. And this session is about describing how a community advisory board can fulfill this need, how to convene one in the federal research context, which we'll say more about what makes that different, and then lessons learned from perspectives of one project's CAB member, community advisory board member, research firm staff, and federal staff. And all of us represent one of those hats here. So we will describe and share the lessons learned from the Advancing Contextual Analysis and Methods of Participant Engagement Project. It's funded by the Administration for Children and Families at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. So I am joined here by Parthena Fields. She is a community a CAMPE. CAMPE is the acronym that we use for our project. Advisory board member, and Kimberly Klum, who is the CAMPE OPRE, Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation project officer. So Parthena, you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everybody. I am Parthena Fields. I reside in Jackson, Mississippi, but I'm originally from Greenville, Mississippi. I work for a nonprofit organization, and I'm also the mom of a dynamic autistic young man. And so that experience in itself has brought me to this work. And that's all I say for right now.
I'm Kim Klum, and as Marla already said, I work in the federal office that funds the center and also funds this specific project. And so I'll just be sharing a little bit of perspective about what motivated us to do this project.
This is fun.
I know, I wonder if maybe if we, and I'll see if I can bend it. I don't know. Hopefully, does that work okay? Okay. So give you a session overview. We have the full session time period, but we tried to arrange this as a kind of interactive session. So we want to give you background on what our project is, but often when we're in these spaces, there are a lot of experts out there who are also doing similar work, and there's a synergy that happens when we can share kind of what we're doing. So in addition, you don't have to be doing work like this. We also want questions. But we wanted to build in space and time for more of a conversation. So our session, we're first going to quickly go over what we are talking about when we're saying a community advisory board. We'll talk about this federal project, and then we will go into some of the details about the community advisory board that informed our project. We'll talk about the composition, the contributions, some reflections, and then we're going to have an interactive chat component using Mentimeter. We're going to ask it'll be a space where you guys can ask questions through what you'll see on the screen. You can tell us your experiences, you can share and receive resources and ideas. So before we begin, the next slide is going to actually get us acquainted with Mentimeter. So those who are interested, you can get out your phones and be ready to sign in on the next slide. Okay, so I've used this in your seats once, and then this is my first time trying to use it here. And I see people are already signing in. Okay, so this is excellent. So now let me close out. So what you would do is you would take a picture, you'd get this on your screen, and then let me find. Team effort. Okay. Uh-oh, were you seeing that? Oh, now we're not seeing. Okay, well, several of you have signed in. Let me keep moving. We will have another chance to experiment with this after we give our overview. So let me go to the next screen. So if those of you who are on Mentimeter, because you want to be, if you could just give me a little sign. Okay, excellent. So on that screen, you're going to see a couple. There's the one where you could show and you reacted with a thumbs up. And then there's another question about who has used Mentimeter before. And I already see that 11 people have given me a thumbs up. 2 people have not used it before. Excellent. Okay, this is a smart crowd. Okay, 13 have used it. We will figure out how you can see the screen that I'm looking at. Oh, and you've already started. Okay, so the third screen is I have experience with the Community Advisory Board. And so this is showing me that 11 people here in the room have said yes, 5 have said no, 2 people so far don't know. So this gives us a read on the room. So a majority, almost a majority, but it's like half and half, yes and no. So this is a perfect group. So we're hoping to hear your experiences. We're hoping to hear questions if you have them. Also in the Mentimeter, there's another place where if you have a burning question as we're talking up here, you want to put it there. We'll come back to it and we'll try to address as many as we can. So thank you for participating with us on this. Okay, so now I'm going to go back.
So as I already said, and as Marla said too, I work for the federal office that funds this project. And my federal office is within the Administration for Children and Families. And the Administration for Children and Families is the federal agency that funds Head Start. It funds the Child Care Subsidy Program. It funds refugee resettlement. It funds child welfare. And my particular office within that agency is the research office for the agency. So we're charged with trying to figure out how to improve our programs, how to bring evidence to our programs, to improve their efficiency, to ensure that they are equitably allocating their resources and services and serving participants. And we're always looking to improve our evidence base. And part of that is we're always trying to improve the methods we use to gather and collect evidence. So kind of alongside that, our office, since about 2016, we've really had a dedicated focus on equity, on trying to figure out how we can use more equitable methods to build evidence. And a big part of that is in our kind of learning journey along this is really realizing that a key way to do that is to bring in more participant voice. Our agency, when I described what our agency does, one thing I did not mention is that our agency actually runs a lot of programs that are administered alongside the Administration for Native Americans. And so we have a lot of programs. So a lot of the programs that are run by our agency have specific programs that are run for tribal nations and tribal communities. And in doing that work alongside tribal nations and tribal communities, we've actually done community engaged research for a long time, because you can't actually do research with tribal nations and tribal communities without doing a community engaged approach. There's a whole infrastructure around that because of the long history of federal harm and misuse of how to engage tribal nations and tribal communities. There's been a very dedicated infrastructure for correcting that. So we'd actually learned a lot for how to do this really well with tribal nations and tribal communities. And we realized that those lessons applied broadly. They didn't just apply to the work we do there. But at the same time, because that work has a more sophisticated history for our agency, there is more of an infrastructure. There's actually set ways to engage community members from tribal nations and tribal communities, but we haven't learned how to do that as well with other communities. So we wanted to figure out how to do this a little bit better. So also, as Dr. Jackson said this morning, it's kind of just good science, right? It's just good science that you bring in the people who are actually participating in your programs to help you understand what it is that's important to know about the programs. I think now that from Dr. Jackson's morning presentation, we're gonna have to figure out how to do the soulful science part of that, because I don't think we have that down. But anyways, this project was one of our first efforts to really figure out how to build more of an infrastructure for our agency to do this kind of work. So not just to do it as kind of like a one-off, to bring in people to just help us kind of figure out one project question, but to kind of help us think more broadly about how we could bring people who have lived experience of our programs and our services to help us figure out how to do our research a little bit differently broadly. So how to affect a lot of different research processes that we use across many different projects.
So just to add a little bit more background on the CAMPE project that Kim just mentioned. So the goal, so Urban Institute is a research organization headquartered in Washington, D.C. And so we were awarded this amazing contract to do this work with OPRE and Kim's team. And the purpose was to help them develop tools and guidance that will better incorporate and advance equitable research practices in the federal context. So on the one hand, we're using this to inform the specific tools and activities that are part of this work, but on the other hand, we're also kind of a test case and a model. So at the end of this, we're taking the guidance that we're learning to produce guides that hopefully other federal agencies and office staff, other communities can use if they want to do a similar approach to incorporating community advisory board in their work. The second purpose is to ensure that the projects and tools that we develop are responsive to the needs and interests of people who participate in or have experience with ACF programs and studies. It has to be relevant. So to that end, the main part of the project that we'll be talking about today is the work that we did to hire community members as experts, not as part of the research collection effort, but as experts, consultants, to increase the robustness of the expertise that is informing the work. We wanted to make sure that the work that came out of this project, that one, the recommendations and the deliverables that we produce out of it were grounded in the realities of ACF program participants. And then two, we wanted to make sure that the project models what it's professing to try to encourage more of, so ethical and meaningful community engagement. We want to mention here that the CAMPE CAB is not, it's something distinct from a federal advisory committee. So we did not seek consensus advice from the CAB. The CAB offered a variety of perspectives to inform project activities. Actually, before I go into that slide, I'll say there are two other components of the work. Well, there are three total. So there's the lived experience component, and one of the aspects of the project involved identifying and assembling a community advisory board. The second component of the lived experience was we wanted to know what else. There's a lot, as Kim said, a lot of federal research that has been for a long time doing community engaged methods. We did an environmental scan to find out projects in the last 10 years that have used participatory methods, because often there are a lot of questions that federal staff and others, research contractors, everyone has about how do you actually get this to work in this context that in a federal context, it's often multi-site, or it's often, you got to have a national perspective. You got to be super, think about the diversity of the constituents that are involved. You also have to think about the restrictions of where the dollars can go. So we wanted to be able to document the different ways that different really interesting federal projects have maneuvered that. The second component of the project was toward the effort to help support ACF in building tools and methods for more equitable research. And some of that also entails understanding the context of the topics that is understudied. So being able to look not just at the research question, but what are the surrounding circumstances that are contributing probably to your study findings that may not have been explicit in your focus of the study. So what we did is a second environmental scan to kind of look at how researchers across different areas, and we really focused on human services programs, how they have been able to successfully incorporate a focus on context when they are doing their research. And then the third component was supporting ACF, some of the federal offices and staff, in a series of equity consultations. So conversations with staff to think through how do you incorporate a more equity-focused lens when you are approaching research at the federal level, and working with colleagues and working with programs that are administered by the Administration for Children and Families. Okay, so now this slide, getting into some of the things we were trying to figure out when we were starting to develop and identify CAB. So essentially, tried to bring together as many different perspectives and experiences as possible in our convening of the Community Advisory Board. The Community Advisory Board was not intended to fully represent the population involved in or affected by ACF programs. And again, this is not a research sample, but we were aiming for a subset reflecting a diversity of perspectives, geographical locations, expertise, gender and cultural perspectives, because ACF programs cover so many areas to really truly reflect the work we needed to be able to tap in a manageable size, kind of the diversity of perspectives that can be out there. And I would say geography was a very interesting one that we navigated, and she talks, you can talk about even how we had meetings when we were talking about, was it 4 or 5 time zones we had to figure out? Yeah. So here are some of the demographics. So the aim was to include intersectional diversity in work teams. So race, ethnicity, we have areas of expertise, TANF, child support, employment training, child welfare, Head Start, domestic violence, homeless, and more. Chosen pronouns available there. So we ended up with, as you can see, at least 2 people with immigrant perspective, 1 with LGBTQ+ perspective. You can see the rest there. What we ended up with, so our members represented 5 regions of the United States: Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, Southwest, and West, including Alaska. So we were very pleased with our success, I would say. We can get more into that if there are questions, but I want to say a little bit about the 4 main activities that our Community Advisory Board was charged with. So the first one, I'll just go in order. So the OPRE, the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, as they are doing their research, like many other organizations, they have an internal editorial style guide, which kind of dictates kind of the branding, the language, the, it goes beyond that, but that kind of makes sure that their products have a certain kind of frame to it. And so this is one of the internal documents that really guides and informs the work that's produced. And so what they wanted was have Community Advisory Board looking under the hood at the language and contributing perspectives on that. The second activity was looking at their welfare and family self-sufficiency learning agenda. So this is published jointly by the Office of Family Assistance and OPRE's Division of Economic Independence. It's a document that describes the planned research activities for learning how TANF, the Cash Welfare System Assistance Program, and other human services programs can best support economic well-being for children and families with low income. So again, these are documents that are driving an agenda and having Community Advisory Board members viewing that, informing that, providing some recommendations around that. The third activity was a sample OPRE study-informed consent process and form. So the informed consent it includes the steps that researchers will take and the language that researchers will often use to inform people of their rights, the risks, and the benefits when choosing whether to participate in a research study. And so the goal of this document is very important and consequential to a study, but often the deliberation, the use of it can be confusing and convoluted. And so being able to have a Community Advisory Board look at that language and provide recommendations and thoughts around that is also another key piece of research practice that is under the hood, but affects a lot. And then the last thing was a sample OPRE study survey that was from a large-scale federal research study previously administered to adults who have participated in interventions to help them navigate employment challenges and achieve economic stability. Kim, did I represent? Anything you would want to add? Okay, so I want to take a second to say the importance that sharing some commitments with the Community Advisory Board members were in the work. As Urban Institute, we had commitments, and as OPRE, they gave commitments. So OPRE's commitment was to be transparent and communicative about when and how Community Advisory Board feedback was being applied to the research processes. The Urban Institute commitment was to connect, kind of aligns with the tail end of the last session. We wanted to make sure that the relationship that we were building with Community Advisory members wasn't simply transactional in the, give us this and we'll give you a little bit of this. We want it to be something that helps further goals that Community Advisory Board members may have. So we wanted to be able to commit to further professional development opportunities, speaking engagements, resume building, conferences, et cetera, the kinds of things that maybe we have access to through our networks that we can open up and share. And then lastly, we wanted to make sure that connections to other Community Advisory Boards and engagements included participation these are some examples of the things that came out of the work. After we were able to assemble a Community Advisory Board, we were then in a really good position to be able to offer up some of what we were able to develop with this team to other projects. So one example was participating in a listening session regarding the Fiscal Responsibility Act TANF pilot program. Also consulting on federally funded microsimulation projects and a climate justice project. So, a lot of projects are looking for Community Advisory Board people, board members who can help advise on things, but it takes time to develop and locate advisors for that. And so the fact that we had a community advisory board that had already received some background and information about the goals of OPRE, et cetera, was really advantageous. Okay, so next I'll turn it over to Parthena. You can tell us some of your perspective on what the experience was really like.
Absolutely. So I heard about the CAMPE CAB project from, at that time, my former CEO. She's now CEO again. She sent me a text message and said, hey, would this be something you'd be interested in? And I said, sure. She said, well, okay, I'll submit, and so it just kind of started from there. Once I read all the information, one thing that interested me the most was being able to have my voice in the room as a person with lived experience. At that time, I had moved into the classroom, I was teaching, but I was also single parent. I had received SNAP, and for the SNAP, EBT, whichever form you're familiar with, I had received child support at one time. And so I knew that this qualified me, if nothing else did, because they wanted to hear my voice. And I was perfectly okay with providing that. And so we just kind of proceeded from there. There was an interview. You may or may not be accepted, but it was such a great interview that I was just like, they're gonna call me back. So they called me back, they asked me to participate, and boom, here we are. But what I hope most of all that the community takes from this, and two separate communities, right? The research community, I hope they lean into community advisory boards. This was quite interesting being on the research process side and not being a person who has either been acted upon or is acting on other people, because in my work with the nonprofit, I had done focus groups. So I was asking questions of other people in order to find out information. But to be on this side where I'm actually informing the process before they even get to the people it was new, but also I felt that my power in that space had been activated, right? Because we already have that power. So it had been activated. I was just like, yes, they get to hear my voice. And I really hope that for the community that I serve, but also the community that I'm a part of, this lets them know that their voice matters. And I will take that message as I continue in the work that I'm doing, but also sharing with my community that when there are opportunities like this, to jump on it. It can feel scary, but your voice is needed. So let's get into the positives and the challenges. We'll talk about the challenges right off, because I like to make sure to end on a positive note. So the challenges were definitely time zones. We were all in different time zones. It was tiring. It was engaging, but it was tiring because sometimes I would be coming from the end of a day, having to engage for a couple of hours, maybe 6 to 8 p.m. my time. And early to bed, early to rise over here. So you're digging into my sleep time around about 8 o'clock. So I had to try to be fully present, right? And then there were other times where things were being held during the day. I'm also one of those people who's an overachiever, so I really want to be present. So there were times that I was in the classroom and I found myself at 2 o'clock jumping in a meeting. If you know anything about the classroom, especially elementary, that's dismissal time. So I'm on my phone like this, trying to listen in on the Zoom and also participate, because I really do want to be in that space, right? Because I know I recognized how important it was for me to be there. That was really one of my only challenges with the project. To dig into the positives, Urban and OPRE were great about prepping us for the work that we were about to do. So with each of the four things that we were engaged in, the WIFSLA, what's the first thing? The style guide. That's it. I knew it was a guide. The style guide, the surveys, all of those pieces, they made sure that we understood what it was we were contributing to before we even started giving our perspective on it. And they spent time doing that. Each of us had a cab buddy, so we weren't left out there in the dark either. So even after in between our engagements, we had a person that we can call on, or who would either check on us to make sure we understood everything. If there was any lack of knowledge, they were helping to fill in those gaps. And so those were the positives. Another positive that I want to highlight is that they were considerate of our time, and that they made sure that we were compensated for our time. And the fourth thing that I want to say about that is that they honored my ask. I don't know if anybody asked anything else, but when we started this project, like I just told you, my time is valuable, right? And I asked right off, first few engagements, that are we going to actually know what impact this is having on the research projects moving forward? And they were wonderful about making sure that as things were happening, we were kept informed that what we were doing was impactful, because I don't want to have my time wasted. And so y'all, wonderful. Thank you so much. And I know I've said that on more than one occasion, but I want to say it publicly here, that really made a difference. For you as researchers to come back and let people know what their work has meant, in not only in your space, but if it's moving work in other places, please let them know, because then that helps them to remain engaged. All right, last one. And this is me putting myself out there in a space of vulnerability. During our last engagement, we were actually able to get together in DC very recently. And so what we're doing as a CAB is putting together our thoughts around participating in the CAB, and it's going to come out in a zine. And one of the questions that they asked us is, what would we say to researchers? And what would we say to other advisory participants? So as I put on my writer's hat, I've been doing a lot of writing lately, y'all. I put on my writer's hat, and this is the only way I could address that question. A hope letter from a CAB member. Dear researchers, approach the work from the stance of cultivating understanding. Your inclusivity as you approach research projects has the power to uplift or hold back. Be the author of hope, not hopelessness. When advisory participants feel heard and their thoughts and opinions valued, it has the power to strengthen the validity of your work, as well as shift the trajectory of their lives. Approach your interactions with conscientiousness and authenticity, recognizing and honoring your biases as well as the barriers of those with whom you're communicating creates a pathway for openness and honesty. If you view people's life experiences as the reason why you come to the work, then the value of their experiences will never be lost on you, and you will be more likely to seek it first as opposed to including it as an afterthought or add-on. Openly give participants credit for being the assets they are. The transparency of inclusivity has the power to shift how those with lived experiences, as well as those with whom you share your results, view the necessity of the work. Although there are limits based on funding and research requirements, and inclusion can be time-consuming, don't be afraid to push the limits or push back. Just because a thing has always been done a particular way doesn't mean it always has to be done that way. Be open to consistently sharing the impact of your collaboration with the people who informed your work. Listen with your head and your heart. Recognize that people are not the sum total of their experiences, although that's why you've brought them in the room. Understand that your position comes with a certain level of privilege and power they don't experience. What you ask is just as important as how you ask it. Be clear and empathetic in your asks. We are colleagues in this work. Dear lived experienced participants, approach the work from the stance of cultivating understanding. Researchers only know what they know. Your authenticity and transparency has the power to shift perspectives. Use it. Treating researchers as villains in your story reduces your ability to see them as people with life experiences of their own. You are in the room as an expert. Just as researchers have expertise in their field, you have expertise in life as a recipient of federal subsidies. Demand to be informed how your input has been helpful. Your story has power, and no one can tell it like you. Let them highlight your contribution by printing your name. Receiving assistance is nothing to be ashamed of. It is the reason that you are in the room. Researchers' work can only be as accurate as you are willing to be transparent. Recognize the same system it took hundreds of years to build will also take a considerable amount of time to dismantle. Initially, your contribution is more impactful than it will appear. This is groundbreaking work. And in order for something new to be built, the ground has to be broken, a foundation laid, and then the house can be built. Show up to each engagement as prepared as possible. Ask questions, especially if you need a deeper explanation or don't understand something. Talk about the work you're doing with your communities. Let them know you're advocating for yourself and them by making your voices heard. Be willing to speak on larger platforms when asked. This can be scary, but again, your story and experiences need to be shared by you. Absolutely no one can convey it with appropriate detail any better than you. Listen with your head and your heart. Recognize you're engaging with people who might come from a place of privilege and power that you are unfamiliar with. This is your opportunity to shift their perspectives. What you say is just as important as how you say it. Be clear and empathetic in your responses. We are colleagues in this work. In hope of change, Parthena.
So it's impossible to follow that. I'm not going to follow that. We are going to be going into our discussion. But Parthena, thank you. Every time she shared this, like we had a 2-day like convening for the first time when 13 members of the Community Advisory Board, who for 18 months had been working with our team, met for the first time in Washington, D.C. And you guys had like a session of like, I don't know, an hour or two where they're like, well, let's just get some ideas on paper. And, you know, part of the federal context is having deadlines for products and things. So we knew that we needed to produce something, but we didn't want to squelch creativity. Parthena went into like a space, like other people were meeting in tables, and Parthena went off, and then she came back and she read that. And I don't think there was a dry eye. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so for those of you who recall, you went into the Mentimeter. Let me do a time check. Okay, we're at 5 after. We're good on time. Okay. If you had not, and I do have to call out, I have a cousin who has who lives in Atlanta, and she is here, Marissa. So thank you for coming. And I know you have a phone and I know you can sign up on Mentimeter too. So please dial in. But so if anyone else hasn't yet gone into the Mentimeter. And she is a rising junior at Howard University. Wave to us, please, Marissa. Thank you. Okay, so before we get into, I just wanted to, this is our thank you. We wanted to acknowledge also our project, our OPRE project team, Marie and Siri, who can't be here, and Kim, who thankfully is here. And then this, so on the left, we have the 13 Community Advisory Board members. On the right is the Urban Institute team, nearly as long. So this is not a 1, 2, 3 people show that happened. It's a huge team. Okay, so now I'm gonna stop share. So I don't know if anyone had burning questions they may have put here. If they didn't, that's fine. Burning questions can also be taken live. Oh, we have burning questions. Ooh, whoa, okay. So this is our first time seeing it. So let's see. I'll start with the first one that I see. How much does the research gained get used toward the solution? How much do the research gained get used toward the solution? Kim, I don't know if you want to.
So I think, so I'm going to translate that question to mean how much of a difference is the input from the Community Advisory Board making? I don't know if that's the right interpretation of that question. So this is not a full answer, but I will just say, so when Marla introduced our division, so in my office, if you've ever worked with the federal government, you know there are many layers. Like there's an agency, and then there's an office, and then there's a division. Anyways, there's just a lot of layers. So I'm in a division, as my colleague in the back, Megan Reed, we're in the division of something called Division of Economic Independence. And this is not what the Community Advisory Board was asked to weigh in on, but this whole process of working with the Community Advisory Board, my colleagues and we've been like, ooh, Division of Economic Independence. Like that's the name of our office. That's what we go out and go out into the world with. And so it's really, in addition to the specific tasks that Parthena and her other advisory board members have weighed in on, it has also kind of just had us asking a lot of big picture questions about how is it we want to be presenting ourselves to the world and what it is that is really kind of the mission of our office. So anyways, that's just an aside, but I think one of the ways in which Parthena's colleagues had the most direct impact is on that learning agenda piece. So if any of you work in an organization where you're constantly looking at the work that you're doing and then comparing it back to your mission, you know, our learning agenda is one of the ways in which we're really doing that. It really helps us direct where it is we're going to put our resources. And the kinds of research questions that we ask have impact in the world, especially, there are moments, especially in TANF programs, which is the area that we mostly work on, and employment and training programs that serve folks who have low incomes, where they really have to make big decisions about how they're going to allocate their funds. So what kinds of employment and training programs they're going to direct their resources to. And our research is one of the ways in which those decisions are made. So the kinds of things that we decide are important to be researching, like what kinds of approaches people are taking to employment and training programs, like coaching is a model that people use, or like providing subsidized jobs is a model that programs use, or all those kinds of things. Those kind of make a difference in how people are directly served. So the fact that Parthena and her colleagues weighed in and like really made us question some of the basic questions we've been thinking we need to answer is really it's going to take us probably a little bit of time to translate that into like what our next kind of funded projects will be, but we're very actively doing that. And I think it's nice because it has many like kind of like years of repercussions in our world.
Okay, that was an awesome question. Okay. I'll go to the right. So the middle one, the block. How do you authentically cultivate CABs when you are in the building phases? How do you approach folks when you may not have the network or relational equity with them? Great question. I can talk about from our project's perspective, from the Urban Institute team's perspective, when we were in the building phase. So part of the work in another example of federal context is that you often have to, before you are allowed or able to implement on anything, they need to know your plan for how you're going to be doing this. And so we probably spent months on the plan for how to actually identify, make sure one, that we're trying to tick the boxes of the categories that OPRE was wanting to be able to get perspectives from. So one, so during the building phase, I think the biggest thing is that we needed to have connections to people who had connections. So as Parthena said, your boss had approached Abhishek, and we had familiarity with your boss and your boss's organization. So in the course of the work that we do across the country over the years, we were able to tap colleagues who have, evaluated a program here or met with people there. So we ended up needing to go through intermediaries who could connect us. Another approach, and the challenge is sometimes we feel like people who are most tapped into these intermediary programs are not always, that's maybe, I'll say cream of the crop, but that's not what I mean. But it's the people who are most connected. And how do we connect to the people who are not as well connected? There was a trade-off. Time, the time to bring people along with it took months even for us to understand what a WIFSLA was, and that's the learning agenda. Like Urban Institute, even though we get contracts with OPRE, there's some internal stuff that we don't know. And so to not only bring that to the work, but then also expect that people who are maybe not even researchers to come to that work. So anyway, so that's how we were able to, one, connect to the CAP, but how were we authentic in our culture, what we attempted to do, and then we can see whether, what we wanted to keep in mind was that at the end of the day, what we are asking of community advisory boards who are contributing their lived experience, their lived expertise, unlike people who may not have lived experience in the situation or circumstance or program, this is not a 9-to-5 question that we're asking people to contribute to the work. When I'm asked on a professional basis to contribute to a project, I'm contributing my 9-to-5. But some of and Parthena, you said it, in the time, in the hours, and being able to incorporate it in your day-to-day. This is big and heavy work that we're asking of people. And so what we tried to do was get to know people well. So we built in the times to have the conversations. We built in the times, as Parthena had mentioned, we had buddies for each of the community advisory board members, so that, if your 9-to-5 or your day didn't fit in the time that we were trying to get you some information or ask you something, there was someone that you could call, and someone who would call you to check in. How are you doing? Well, how's life? Like, to go beyond the work of it. So we hoped that was a way that we were trying to come at this work differently than often research and researchers come at the work. We were coming to people, and we wanted people to see us as people in this work and know that we cared as much about what was going to be coming out of this work as the people who were going to be contributing to this work. I don't know if there's anything you want to.
I do want to say that was absolutely appropriate, what she said. So having that CAB buddy, so if you notice that there were almost as many Urban Institute people as CAB members, but that's because each of us had a buddy. Some of us shared a buddy, right? It just depended. And that helped us to build that relationship. So even though I didn't meet everybody until this year, I had a connection with somebody. And if I could see that face on the screen, then that I knew I had a relationship with at least one person. And so that allowed me to be even more present in that space. And that, I think, feeds into the next question, like, how do you keep your community advisory board consistently active? Just like she said, like in between calls, they were touching base with us, checking to see if we were okay, if we couldn't be there, making sure that we got filled in, we got the video or whatever that was, and we understood absolutely everything that was going on between engagements. And we knew that we were going to see each other once a month anyway. So it was really like we're seeing each other once a month, right? So they would meet with us even then.
So we have tons of awesome questions here. I want to jump ahead. I want to see, isn't this fun? Okay. So you guys found the screen. So which topics are you most interested in today? This is the sum total of your prioritizations. If some of you hadn't hit this screen yet, and if you see it, you're able to click on these different categories, and it may jump around. So right now, but we see that maybe four people have participated. Oh, 5. See how things move? So it looks like trust building and power dynamics. We can kind of get into power dynamics, recruitment and hiring. We've gotten to a little bit compensation and then onboarding and training. Let's talk a little bit about power dynamics and trust building.
I think I can take that one. So we just talked about the trust building piece, right? So we talked about that. So let's talk power dynamics, right? So I can say that the members of OPRE and Urban never made us feel like at any point in time that they just knew more or were better than any of us. They brought us to the table as experts, which was very important. What it allowed was for us to recognize that we were just important in that space as they were. And they made sure to say that over and over again, that our opinion was valued, and gave us the reasoning for being in the room. Even though some of us already had it, there were some of us who needed it a little bit more than the others. So it helped to continue to say that, so that the power dynamic did not exist. Every person in the room was just important as the next.
No. And I'll say something about, from Urban Institute perspective. So often in these projects, or like if Urban Institute is doing a project where we were the liaison in this situation. We had the funder. We know that funders have a level of power that often funders don't even, you're obviously aware of your power, but it's like when anyway, I won't get in, but it even when you are working really hard to say, we're even, we really want to hear your knowledge. We know at the end of the day that there's in this case, a federal funder who has the final say, because that's the federal dollars, taxpayer dollars, which is another thing that we always have to keep in mind when we're using project resources. So there is a power dynamic, and you can't get around that. And I think and that kind of ties to what the commitments were that we mentioned, that having OPRE say, okay, we are committed to being transparent. So there are certain things that we're going to be asking. We might be asking of a community advisory board. We might be asking you as researchers. This is how it will be used. We can't promise that it's going to be used to make changes tomorrow. And so, but just knowing that, having a better sense of what is this going to be used for is a way to kind of address those power dynamics. Like, these are the things that we know we can't change. Here are the things that we're going to work on. And we want you to be well aware of that. So I'm going to ask, I know that many of you have used community advisory boards. I would love to hear if there is someone's perspective on power dynamics. I see a hand, and I don't know if there are.
So let's try again, wait, go around the call from here. We got about 7 minutes, so we can go about 5 minutes for this, sort of sum it up. Then just want to catch you on the mic, so we mic on the end here, so it's
Okay.
not like tossing. Awesome. Come here.
I just want to say thank you. I've been on several community advisory board. I am the best auntie ever, says my niece and nephew, and that's my community. And I work with learning disability, and I work as parent mentor for Atlanta Public School, family engagement specialist for Morehouse. And one of the things that you were saying, I love your speech, I'm gonna use it for now, and I'm gonna find it somewhere and I'm gonna use it, because if I had known that, I would have been more influential. If I had, when you spoke to the service provider, I call them service providers, and then you spoke to the community leaders, then if I had understood that in the beginning of my engagement, it would have helped me be more effective. So I want to say thank you for that. And also how to get the other organizations to embrace that, because when you embrace that, then people are more engaged. So that's just, I wanted to say thank you, because that really touched me. So I will be using it. I'll give you credit, but I'll be using it going forward. So thank you. Sure.
Maybe any other questions? I know we're getting short on time. And while people are thinking if they have questions, this last page on the, whoops, I hit the wrong one, on the Mentimeter is a place where we can share resources. The way this app works, that at the end, you'll be able to, they'll ask you if you want to save the results and so you should be able to have these links. But we have a link to an Urban Institute landing page where we have a lot of different tools around community advisory boards and other forms of participatory engagement. UC Berkeley is one. Someone has added gifted and lift educational curriculum and content for children. So that is a page you guys can continue to add information. Does anyone have other comments, or you want to talk about either power dynamics, a question? We'd love to hear live.
This is a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for what you're doing. I have a quick question that's about reciprocity. So you guys did a wonderful talk about how there's inclusivity, how there's this leveraging and shifting power. My question is about publications, and about how are you, as you're making publications, as you are really writing this up, can you talk about how you're including your community advisory board members in those? And also, can you talk about how you've given back to the communities that you have been getting all of this intellectual properties from, to make sure that you are sharing that power?
Thank you for that wonderful question. And I feel like I can answer from the Urban Institute perspective. I can answer, and I hope others will. We thought about that a lot. And at the end of this work, we have several products that are due. Like we said, we're producing toolkits and guides. And so in those toolkits and guides, we're drawing from each one of the engagements. So one of the challenges, I would say, is that we have an 18-month window on the period of the Community Advisory Board. All these other engagements that are coming out of this have been extra outside of the contracted time.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
and as you know, two of the things we want to be mainly mindful of is using people's time well. But anyway, part of the convening was to talk about what kind of shared products can come out of this, because we definitely, I mean, the bulk of what we are learning in terms of the guides is coming from other people, not from us. I don't know if others want to say how we But we have co-authorship opportunities, the zine that Parthena was talking about, is one place where we're going to be featuring with
Yeah, so what I just read to you will be one of the things that's featured in the zine. So we came together to individually and collectively contribute to this product that's going to be put out as a result of our work as a CAB. And then we also get to participate in seminars and conferences like this. And we continue to be compensated for things like that. So I'm not just out here on my own free time. You know, this is an opportunity for you to go tell other people. And so that is how we are continuing to be engaged. And I truly appreciate it, because anytime I get to tell other people what to do and about what I've done, listen, that feels so good to me, because there are a lot of people that are sitting on their expertise, and I don't want to do that. I want to be able to share with the people who want to hear it, and even those who don't, because sometimes we need to shift those perspectives, right? So I get to do that as a CAB member moving forward. Did you have anything to add, Kim? Okay.
Oh, I will just say one thing quickly, and please, both of you correct me, but so a lot of the things that the CAB produced are things for us, for our own internal kind of, and everything that was a recommendation to us was like fully vetted by the CAB before it was recommended to us. So I mean, there was like a sign off by the CAB before things came to us.